I was in junior high school and my parents wanted to move, and my parents were looking in the Curtis Park area. My mother was a caterer, and the realtor happened to be one of her clients, and he told her, if I get you a home in Curtis Park, I won't get any more listings.
I think it's a truism to say that few needs of mankind are more basic than the requirement of a roof over his head. Yet, in this basic area, we have had quite an interesting development of legal principles.
One thing I remember when we had to look for a new house is that my father would have me look through the Sacramento Bee and the Sacramento Union to see what homes were for sale, and I would call in the morning. You get this feeling that, they don't want to sell to you. I don't care if the home is for sale, and all of a sudden they give you this song and dance. So after a while I got to the point where I would say, hey, we're Japanese. If you don't want to sell to us, don't waste my time.
I have difficulty believing that an overwhelming majority of the people in California really would prefer to have a system of housing discrimination where people buy houses according to their race instead of according to their economic ability to pay.
Now the question is, does a person have the right to discriminate on the basis of color, even if he is a private residence? Can I discriminate? Can I say, I don't want to sell my house to you because you're black? And this becomes the next legal debate here for how we're going into the 1960s.
As a result, that was why the Rumford Fair Housing Act was proposed by Byron Rumford, who was the assemblyman from Berkeley.
And so this prohibited people from discriminating on the basis of color so that anybody could buy a home anywhere they would like.
This bill was designed to help people, and I'm sure there are people being helped by it, whether they're Negroes, whether they're Mexicans, or whether they're Catholics or Jews. I have no knowledge, but at least they have a question under the law, and they're asking for protection.
And we have moved through the wilderness of legal segregation, and now we stand on the border of the promised land of integration. The old order is passing away. And I'm convinced as I stand before you tonight that the system of segregation is on its deathbed.
It's a very nuanced legislation, and that was why the level of attention that it got, once it was passed from the California Real Estate Association, spawned the movement to overturn it. California Real Estate Association looked at fair housing legislation as an existential threat to its existence as an entity, because they relied so much on discriminatory practices that kept neighborhoods a certain way, either all white or all black.
And this is when they begin this process of creating a referendum to be put on the ballot across the state to undo the Rumford Act, and that became Proposition 14.
People talk about various civil rights acts that, catch your attention, like the National Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. In California, that act was Proposition 14. Blacks understood it to mean I could never buy the house I want if it was in a white neighborhood. Whites saw it to mean we could never have to sell to a black man or to a Mexican or to an Asian if I didn't want to, and I could protect my property ownership rights.
It is a call for a constitutional amendment that in substance will legalize segregation. If this constitutional amendment comes into being, it will be a tragic setback, not only for California, not only for America, but for the cause of justice and for democracy, and it will be one of the great tragedies of the 20th century.
It would give legal sanction to bigotry and make racial hatred a part of our Constitution. Keep California in the lead in the 20th century. Vote no on bigotry. Vote no on Proposition 14.
So Prop 14 represented really California's first real test of the racial divide in this country on a political scale heretofore not seen before.
And through this process, Prop 14 was successful in a blue state that was very, very democratic.
I think that most of us who were in the thick of this fight on Proposition 14 from its very inception were confident that we were eventually going to win it. But I think very few of us would admit that we would win it by such a wide margin.
The margin of victory for this was incredible because it was a 2-to-1 margin. It was over 60%. And even in Sacramento, it was over 60% margin of victory.
I was raised in Del Paso Heights, so when Prop 14 was passed, I was 14 years old. And everybody in the black community understood what that meant. For those that wanted to move into more of the middle class, they saw Prop 14 as a killer to those dreams.
I think you'll see a return of the ads in the newspapers restricted. We will see a return of the exclusive neighborhoods where people will be excluded on the basis of race or color. This is inevitable. This was the purpose of it.
It constitutes what we think is a clear mandate of how the population of this state feels, and we also feel as though in this, our local board and our state association, we're actually representing the majority of the people.
The NAACP, whom I represent, is preparing at this present time a suit to be filed in the state Supreme Court directing the Secretary of State and the state printer not to take any action to include Proposition 14 as a part of the state constitution.
Across the state, we see other folks begin to file more cases and more cases. And so all of a sudden, as these cases become, more than a handful, it becomes an issue for the state Supreme Court.
Are you ready to argue again?
I could argue it this afternoon. I know it like I know my alphabet.
What do you think chances are that they'll make the decision you think ought to be made?
I've always thought that the chances of that were very, very good. I've never felt as confident about a lawsuit in all my life as I feel about this one.
So with all of these cases, the California Supreme Court makes the decision that Prop 14 was actually against the law, actually did not represent the best interest of a fully integrated state. Unfortunately, the California Real Estate Association had challenged this and took it up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
The appeal of that particular case had the U.S. Supreme Court rule in favor of Colley's side of the issue, and then the Rumford Fair Housing Act became the law of the land in California, became the law of the state.
But and at the same time, this was the rise of the Republican Party in California during that time. And Ronald Reagan promotes this whole process of having the right to discriminate.
We're doing our best now to keep the campaign promises we made last year. And one of those promises was to seek the repeal of the Rumford Act. One of man's basic rights is the right to own and dispose of his property as he sees fit.
I present this bill to you as passed by the Senate, providing for an outright repeal due to the fact that the people of California have voted in unmistakable language that they wish that this statute be taken off the books.
The southern state of Maryland has adopted fair housing legislation, and here they sit dragging California backwards. I don't think that they should be proud of what they're doing. The climate in California now is such that we do not need this type of leadership in the field of race relations.
Now, this is the part of the law that I am opposed to.
But I don't think the law goes that far. It's degrading to go to somebody's house or to call them on the telephone and have them say to you that the apartment is available, and to walk up to the place and have them look at the color of your skin and decide without asking anything about your ability to pay or your moral character. They simply look at the color of your skin and decide on that face value that they aren't going to rent to you. And when you have this kind of thing, you could not expect any dialogue between people. You cannot expect people to understand each other when they are physically separated.
There's no question that you and I are probably in disagreement on one feature involved in open housing. For the individual homeowner, no matter how much I deplore his prejudice, that there is a great danger that government by law says to this individual how he can or must dispose of his property.
The symbolism associated with fair housing in this state is such,
each time the chief executive of the state makes a statement indicating that he is opposed to fair housing legislation. It seems to me that this kind of statement serves as an invitation to violence.
And I think it was not a coincidence that the first major urban rebellion occurred in California after Proposition 14.
That was a period of a lot of frustration. You have to remember that there were riots happening in various cities across the country, so we wanted to see some concrete evidence that this country really meant what it said when we were talking about equality for all.
They could get rid of these old houses and put some new apartments up here, do something for us. They act like they don't care. They want us to stay in these old tore-down buildings. I don't want to stay in them. I'm not going to stay in them. If they don't hurry up and do something, I'm going to have to. I'm going to have to have some help too. So I wish we'd get some kind of help.
And so we began to see that Martin Luther King's civil rights movement was starting to lose momentum in terms of people's patience with the nonviolence philosophy.
But after all, a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and democracy have not been met.
I was at Sac State when he made the second speech, and it was almost a concession to, things like redlining, which unfortunately exists to this day.
Large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, humanity, and equality. It is just as necessary for the concerned person and the person of goodwill to condemn the intolerable conditions which continue to exist in our society, which cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative but to engage in violence in order to call attention to their problem.
Dr. King's death had a profound effect on the Negro community, both in Sacramento and across the nation. Here in Del Paso Heights, a predominantly Negro community in Sacramento, people were upset and they were thoughtful.
Well, I was completely stunned and numbed. Even now, I feel that way.
I can hear him counseling now that we should love even though they strike us down. But this is part of the price you pay for freedom, and no price is too high to be paid until total freedom comes to all men without regard to race, color, or creed.
As President Johnson enters the East Room of the White House, where he will sign the new Civil Rights Bill, which prohibits the racial discrimination in the sale and rental of houses and apartments.
Of course, all America is outraged at the assassination of an outstanding Negro leader. We all know that the roots of injustice run deep. Fair housing for all who live in this country is now a part of the American way of life.
And so everything is now codified in law, that we're able to have the freedom and the right to purchase a home anywhere we want. And that's all good in paper, that's all good in writing. But the reality of the matter is people can still do that process of selecting who they want in their homes. You will see people trying to buy houses that were all of a sudden off the market. And you will see people trying to rent houses that all of a sudden that were unavailable.
When he opened the door and he saw my face, he went, like, oh, she's black, .
So you see all of these undercover types of processes in place?
I went to work for IBM. The building was at Capitol Mall at that time. And one day I left work and decided to walk down N Street where there were numerous apartment buildings at the time. I stopped at every building that had a for rent sign. People were very courteous and told me, "Dear, I'm so sorry, we just rented the apartment. I'm actually fixing something for the young lady that's coming back." Others would just say, "Well, I'm sorry, the apartment isn't available." There were probably 12 of them that I stopped at, but none had anything that was available to me. It is very subtle sometimes. And even unto this day, finding housing for African Americans can be difficult.